Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a quick first look at ARC Raiders using the RTX 5090. We're using the MSI Gaming X Trio version of the card, playing on the latest NVIDIA drivers and pairing with 64GB of DDR5 as well as a 9800X3D. This will be a pretty quick video because I just want to kind of check the game out, first impressions, see how it runs type of thing on a 5090, obviously, top line card. We only have 2 minutes of game time here. I just jumped in just to make sure that the game was properly installed. So I'm just going to come in, see how it, kind of runs at different resolutions, see how it works, graphic settings, things like that. More of a first impressions here with the 5090 before checking out some other GPUs in future videos. Let's hop in. All right, so digging into the settings here, we are going to use exclusive full screen, but interestingly enough, you can see that it notes some of the issues with exclusive full screen that, of course, everyone knows about. The fact that switching through apps can sometimes cause things to become stuttery, and it actually doesn't offer any sort of performance benefit. So, we're aware of that at this point. We know that exclusive full screen is not necessarily required. If you are just alone in an app, most instances, it does actually provide a little bit smoother experience, but that immediately is disrupted anytime that you change anything or switch an app. So it's interesting to see that it actually calls that out and does not want you to play in exclusive full screen. That's actually, I have to say, that may be the first time I've ever seen it. So we're going to start off here at 1080p. You can see that it does use preset K. I don't have any sort of override, so definitely nice that it uses a transformer model by default. At 1080p, definitely with a 5090, we do want to get the best possible visual quality here, and 1080p should be more than, enough for this card to handle. So we're going to go for DLAA, which is, of course, that native resolution using DLAA as our anti-aliasing. And it looks like we do have RTX for our global illumination. So dynamic all the way up to epic here. This is an Unreal Engine 5 game, so all the way up to epic here. It's going to be our max setting, just leaving everything else here at epic. So these are max 1080p settings using DLAA, so at our native resolution here. So I believe this is kind of our intro tutorial area here. Actually just threw me straight in, haven't even created a character or anything. But as you can see, of course, 1080p max settings, oftentimes this will lead you into a CPU bound scenario, even with, higher end CPU like a 9800X3D. But luckily enough, it is actually not doing that. And at least to begin with here, we do kind of have to keep an eye on, this game, just given the fact that it is an Unreal Engine 5 game. Unfortunately, anytime we play Unreal Engine 5 games, it's kind of something you have to keep in mind that there is oftentimes a stuttering issue. But at least to begin with here, not really any sort of major issue. Only using about 4.5 gigabytes of video memory. It is pulling 400 watts, and our CPU is being pretty well utilized, around 40%, 75 degrees Celsius, so it is pretty toasty. I have been getting some comments on my the heat of my CPU. The CPU can handle going pretty hot, but I do have to say, my CPU is kind of heating up more than I would like, so I do maybe need to go in and repaste it. I also have no idea how to play this game, so I'm just going to kind of be going through it and hopefully figuring everything out. But I do have to say, the game does look really good, of course. As far as the RTX goes, the lighting, it looks good, but no major, nothing is really blowing me away here. But obviously, very competitive, great FPS here. This is kind of like an extraction shooter, I believe. So it is a game that, you kind of play alone until you don't. You can play with other people and you will come into contact with other groups here and there. So you definitely having a high FPS, being able to compete in that kind of way is certainly important. And 1080p here seems to be really no issue whatsoever, at least to begin with here, getting right around 200 FPS on our average, 1% lows at 130. Very smooth experience. I guess here with this lighting, this may be a little bit more where you might see some of this. Oh, that guy is definitely not very friendly, but this might be a little bit more where you might see, some of the benefits of that RTX kind of coming through. But honestly, the lighting, I don't know. RTX is cranked up all the way here, but still, this lighting, I don't know, it looks kind of like flat a little bit. It doesn't actually look too great, but regardless, we're still getting really, really solid performance here, even with the RTX. Now, RTX, in my opinion, for a multiplayer game or a game where having a higher FPS can potentially result in some benefits. Certainly not something I would recommend. So we kind of see where we're at right here, right around 200, 213 on our average. Let's go ahead. We'll keep it on our max settings here. But the only thing I do want to just adjust here is just turning off our RTX. I guess static here uses pre-calculated, has the smallest performance cost. So just turning this down all the way here, and let's just see if this does provide any sort of performance benefit, and it certainly does. So now this is giving us obviously a major improvement. So where we were getting right around 200, maybe a little bit higher, like 210, 215 in that area, we're getting about a 50 FPS increase. And honestly, at least in this particular scene, it doesn't really look too much different. So, you know, in my opinion, if you are playing a multiplayer game like this game where, you know, having a higher FPS can even remotely increase your odds of performing better against other players, I do think it's probably worth turning off that RTX until, you know, GPUs do reach a point where RTX can be thrown on. You can still get incredibly competitive FPS. I just don't think it's worth it. And even then, it may not be worth it for, you know, most people. It's probably better just to kind of turn down settings and get higher FPS more often than not. So now moving up to 1440p here and sticking with DLAA and using that transform model. Back on highest possible settings here. So this is using that RTX, which, at least to begin with here in this particular area, isn't really super noticeable as far as any sort of visual benefit. It still looks relatively similar. But what I am, you know, glad to see here, and I have certainly noticed that Unreal Engine 5 games, it's kind of hit or miss whether or not they have like a major stuttering issue. You can see our frame time graph is relatively flat here. 1% lows look good. Average here 175, just about 30 or 40 less than we were at 1080p. Still an incredibly, you know, competitive FPS, and obviously a really sharp looking picture here. Now DLAA is certainly not as required, or not really required at all once you move up to 1440p. But is definitely resulting in a very, very sharp looking picture here. I mean, this is looking absolutely great. I'm even playing on a 4K monitor, which oftentimes when you play at lower resolutions on higher resolution monitors, sometimes it can look not so great, but at least in this particular instance, it's populating the monitor really well. So I do think this is, you know, another compelling option if you did just want to play native 4K or native 1440p rather at, you know, max settings using DLAA. You are going to get a really, really good looking picture, and you are going to get an incredibly competitive FPS. You can see here right around 180 at least in this particular scene. Now, of course, here's where you may want to, you know, turn off your RTX or at least limit it. So going down to static here does let you reclaim quite a bit of FPS. And I believe, if I remember correctly from the playtest, this is where we get kind of assaulted by another player here. But definitely, you know, again, not to beat a dead horse, but I do think generally playing a multiplayer game or any game where you're kind of interacting with other players using RTX is a bit silly. So I would recommend, you know, given the fact that you are reclaiming so much FPS by just turning off that RTX, probably better to just at least turn off the RTX. Even if you do want good looking visuals, at least from what I can see so far, you're not really losing too much by just, you know, keeping on high settings and just disabling the ray tracing or just going to that static option. Now, 1440p, certainly you don't need to be playing on DLAA, so you don't need, you know, a native picture here. So even going just over to something like balance here will still result in a really good looking picture. And this does give you, you know, where we were getting around 200 FPS here previously, we are now getting around 250 in this particular area, which I guess I'll just show that real quick because we were getting different FPS prior, but you can see if we play it native here, you can see it does drop all the way down to 200, and going over to balanced, we go all the way up to 250. And honestly, at 1440p, playing at balanced, using this, you know, preset K model, this transform model, does look really, really strong. So this is definitely another way. If we recount our 1% lows there, you can see still resulting in really, really solid 1% lows. No major issues here, which is certainly nice to see given the fact that this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, which has so many issues when it comes to 1% lows. Typically, we are able to come in here and, you know, not only get a high FPS, but get a consistent FPS, and the frames are being delivered consistently enough that certainly, you know, I feel confident that we would be able to compete against other players, of course, you know, NPCs or enemies like this, and have, you know, a totally fine time doing it. And now, just out of curiosity, if we were to kind of just try to get maximum possible FPS here at 1440p, let's go for that low preset here. Stick with DLSS on balance here and see just how much FPS we can squeeze out of this thing. And you can see we are getting an absurd 350 FPS. And what's more important than the high FPS in this particular case, and really in any case when you're playing a game like this, is the 1% low. So the fact that our frame time graph is just looks like a flat line here, and we'll go ahead and move forward here into our next kind of section here, but the more flat that line stays, the better, and that's actually far more indicative of a smooth, nice experience as opposed to just a high number on our average, or that FPS number. The 1% lows and that frame time graph are really going to be your main indicators for what is a smooth experience. So go ahead and call for our extraction here, and you can see, even, doing things like that, interacting with the game world, not really causing any sort of issue with our 1% low. So, and honestly, I do have to say, even going for the low setting here, the game still looks totally fine, totally decent. In fact, it does seem to be one of those games that even on a low preset still looks pretty solid. So definitely, something to consider if you don't really care too much about, having really, really phenomenal looking visuals. If you kind of just want a more competitive type experience, looks like you can certainly do that and get a really solid FPS. And again, what's far more important than just that solid FPS is the fact that we are getting the frames very, very consistently. All right, and finally here, going up to 4K. We're going to start off, just out of curiosity here at 4K max settings. So this is using 4K max RTX epic settings here with DLAA and using that transform model. Definitely overkill. You don't need DLAA at 4K. You don't need that really at all. When you move on from 1080p and even 1080p, there are certainly cheaper options, but we're just going to go for max possible settings and see what we can do here at 4K. All right, so loading in here 4K max settings, a native resolution using DLAA. The game, of course, looks incredible. I mean, it looks great. It's a really beautiful looking game. I do like the art style a lot. And we are, without any sort of tinkering, just throwing it on here at max settings, we are getting what I would consider to be a competitive FPS, right around 120. Respectable 1% lows around 70, 80. Not like the best I've ever seen, but definitely nothing I'm going to complain about, especially considering some of what I have seen from some other Unreal Engine 5 titles. So all in all, pretty impressed here. Now I will say, of course, you certainly don't need DLAA when you're here at 4K. Like I said before, you really don't even need to have any sort of RTX on. So there is definitely some tweaking we can do to really get, a more, more reasonable kind of level of performance without having to, like compromise as much as we are. But even with no compromises whatsoever, just throwing everything here, complete maxed out. The DLAA is overkill. In my opinion, the RTX is overkill. We are still getting about 120 FPS on average. So, one of the great things, like I always say about the 5090 and these higher end cards, is just the ability to come in here, kind of just crank everything, have a good experience. You don't really have to worry too much about, not getting great performance. You're pretty much just going to get good performance without really doing any work whatsoever. But for me, I would change a few things first. First of all, I don't think we need to play at DLAA, so let's just go ahead and bump this down to balance. I still think that's going to look really good, and I don't think RTX is necessary here. So let's just go for that static lighting. This will still result in a good-looking 4K picture. Still looks essentially native, but now we've added about, we were around 120, now we're at about 190. So we're adding about 50% to our FPS, another, about 80 FPS, now climbing all the way up into the 200. Still getting what is, in my opinion, a convincing looking 4K image, good looking visuals. The lighting still looks good. I mean, like the shadows all look good. World still looks great. Graphics look great. All the textures, everything, that's not being adjusted here. So this is definitely, in my opinion, a better way to kind of experience the world. It is nice to see, this big open world that we're kind of in. I know they're kind of, sectioned off maps. Only using about 6 gigabytes of video memory here. Definitely the DLSS is helping us a bit there, but definitely nice to see that, we are still getting such solid performance. And really what I'm certainly, glad to see is just the fact that the 1% lows are not an issue. That's always kind of a question for games that kind of have, Unreal Engine 5 is, the way that they're kind of built is just, it's just, you're not 100% sure whether or not you are going to be getting a consistent 1% low type experience. So getting right around 200 FPS. I'm hearing some gunfire here, so we'll see if we can get into a firefight here. I am not super hopeful. I have no idea really what I'm doing in this game, so if I do get into a firefight, I imagine this game might be kind of a pain to benchmark just due to the fact that kind of jumping in and out of different maps here and different matches might be a little bit time consuming, but regardless, it is nice to see that, you know, certainly we are still getting really solid performance here. And if we did just kind of want to see, hey, what can we get? We don't really care about visuals. We just have a 4K monitor. We want to play at max settings. It's also nice to see how fast these changes, you can see them taking effect with this transparent menu. But if we just go on low settings here, and you can see I don't actually see any sort of option for frame generation. Or it is actually right here. So let's just actually see. I don't like frame generation, but if we did just throw on, okay, it does have multi-frame generation. I don't like frame generation. I'm not going to use it, but if you're curious, yes, it does have multi-frame generation. So let's just go for here the low graphics preset here, and let's just say, hey, we want maximum possible FPS. So let's go for ultra performance here at this 4K setting. Here you can see we are in a case where our GPU is no longer the bottleneck. So our GPU is at 85% utilization. Our CPU is at 72% utilization. Some of that may be due to the fact that we did load in some new settings here, so new textures and things like that with this low preset. It's possible that that will kind of lower. Now, 81 degrees is kind of where I was talking about. I do think that we can probably, I may want to actually kind of repaste my CPU because I don't think that 81 is really where I want my CPU to be hanging out all the time. As, okay, I think this is not where I want to be, but regardless, I definitely think we saw enough to kind of see what we're getting here, but yeah, I'm playing by myself here, so no one to really help me. I wonder what happens if I just surrender. Is that it? Okay, I just exited the game. Well, regardless, I'm going to play more of this game, and I am going to check more of it out. I just kind of wanted to get a video out, just looking at the performance. I do have to say, I am, you know, relatively pleased and surprised to see, given the fact that it is an Unreal Engine 5 game, and given the fact that it is, in my opinion, a visually impressive looking game, that it is able to achieve high FPS and that the 1% lows especially kind of maintain and keep up with, you know, the settings as you kind of raise and lower the settings. They seem to kind of raise and lower in proportion. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Short one there, didn't really go super in depth. I want to spend a little more time with this game on my own to kind of know exactly what to benchmark as we get into some of the more lower end GPUs and mid-range GPUs that might be a little bit more, you know, questionable whether or not they can perform at this level. But 5090, again, you know, benchmarking the 5090 is always kind of a funny thing because 5090 can really run any game, and certainly Arc Raiders is no exception. It can run just fine. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.